outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
All right, how's it going? I hope your Christmas is and New Year, just everything. I hope it's gone well. Welcome back to Teachers Talk Radio. We are back again after one of our only broadcasting holidays of the year is over the winter break. So it's fantastic to be back on air with you live on TTR. Got a fantastic show coming up for you this evening, talking something very, very topical, which is the VAT, private schools VAT policy from Labour, which has been hitting the headlines consistently over the last 3 or 4 days, particularly since Bridget Phillipson did an interview with, I believe it was The Times. We'll look at various quotes from that in a moment, but it's certainly been hitting the headlines big style. And what we're going to do this evening is talk about the policy, consider the details of it, consider whether it is a good or bad thing overall. Obviously, there will be people on both sides of this who will have opinions on it. Before we get into that, I'm going to outline what the policy changes have been and what they are. But I'd just like to give a shout out to our sponsor on the show tonight, that is John Catt Educational, a wonderful publisher who have been supporters of Teachers Talk Radio for so long. It is the new year, so why not go over to John Catt, johncattbookshop.com. Grab yourself a professional development book at johncattbookshop.com. You can get 20% off using the code JCTTR2425 and benefit from any John Catt book on the website, but also you can add as many books as you want into your basket and proceed to check out. So a massive thanks to John Catt. Really looking forward to partnering and working with them again in 2025. Now, to talk a little bit about this issue, it certainly interests me. Bridget Phillipson said that the VAT exemption for private schools was a luxury that we can't afford, quote. She said back in November, our state schools need teachers more than private schools need embossed stationery. Our children need mental health support more than new swimming pools. Our students need careers advice more than AstroTurf pitches. And she also suggested more recently that very few students would leave the private schools as a result of the VAT policy change. The Conservative government has labelled this policy as, quote, vindictive. They've described it as a vindictive policy, so strong words from them. Recently, there was a poll. Now, you'll have to forgive me because I forgot to reference who carried out the poll, which was silly of me. But there was a poll just the last couple of days where 54% of people replying in the country said that they supported the idea of the exemption on VAT being removed, and for private schools to pay VAT, or for there to be VAT on fees. 22% oppose it in the country. Now, there are lots of opinions out there on this, tons of opinions out there on this. Some people have said that education should never be taxed. It doesn't matter who's providing the education, where the education is provided, university, private school, state school, nursery, it should just not be taxed, full stop. There are people in that camp who would say that, well, I've seen it, quote, education is never a luxury. I saw somebody saying milk doesn't become a luxury because it was bought at Waitrose, as a comparison. But I've seen many people reply to that and say that's ridiculous, because the fact that education has been made free means that it cannot be a luxury because it's available for free at the point of delivery. So there's a ton of commentary on this that we've had online. I am lucky this evening to have 4 sort of expert panelists. I'm going to say that, certainly experts within education, Maybe not experts on VAT and tax policy. I don't know. They might be, but they're certainly experts in education. And I'm going to bring them on now, hopefully, starting with Katrina and Christine and Ian and Sarah. Now, just before we kick off this conversation, I thought it would be lovely to just go around everybody. It's very rare, by the way, I have 5 guests at the same time. So this must be a first. Maybe not. I don't know. But I'll go around everybody, and I'm just going to give you sort of a minute to tell everybody a little bit about you and what you're currently doing. So we'll start with, bit of feedback. We'll start with Ian.
Hello, Tom. Yes, my name is Ian Lloyd. I've been 20 years in the education sector. I've worked in both independent and state-sponsored schools, mainstream sector, and I'm looking forward to contributing to this evening's discussion with a balanced view.
Brilliant. Oh, before I move on to Sarah's introduction, we've already had some texts in. Helen Barnett says there's a new poll on the Times. 74% are against it. So listen, my polling came from one particular report in The Guardian. I'm sure other polling does exist. But anyway, I thought I'd throw that in. Sarah, this is going to be fun tonight. This is going to be fun. Sarah, go on.
Yeah, it is going to be fun. Hi, I'm Sarah. As you can see, I'm a teaching fellow at the University of Southampton. I've been teaching now, I think I'm in my 4th year at Southampton. But before then, I was a secondary school teacher for nearly 11 years. So I've been in both places. I taught English and media at secondary school, and I'm doing computer science at the University of Southampton. Hello, everyone.
Brilliant. Christine?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name's Christine Cunniff. I'm the principal of LVS Ascot. It's a co-ed school, 4 to 19 day and boarding. And I'm a second career teacher. I've done just over 30 years and have taught in state, comprehensive, grammar, and now the independent sector.
And Katrina.
Hi, I'm Katrina Lowry. So I currently work as a neurodiversity specialist. So I help nurseries, schools, colleges, and businesses with support for neurodivergent people. I'm here more as a parent today because my daughter goes to a private school, and I am in favour of VAT on the fees.
Hold your horses, Katrina. I haven't asked you yet.
No, that's all right. I just thought I'd say
you're just getting in there first.
I'm an education professional, but that's what I was asked to talk about today. But I have taught in special schools, mainstream, private schools as well. So my last school was actually a private school. So I come at that from the professional experience, and I got 21 years experience in the classroom.
Brilliant. Well, as I said, we've got a heck of a lot of experience and insight to discuss this. So I'll come back to the first person I introduced. So Ian, I'll roll back round to you to start with. Now, when I said the VAT, the Labour policy on VAT, when I said VAT exemption, right, being removed, is there anything you want to correct me on that?
I think you've been very careful in your choice of words by saying VAT exemption. If you take a little look at most of the newspapers and other media outlets, they're using quite inflammatory language about the removal of tax breaks to independent schools. And there is no such thing as a tax break on a tax that doesn't exist. This tax has existed from yesterday and still is not actually a legal entity, as it has not received royal assent yet.
Ian, I'll start off by asking you on this policy. What is your view then on the policy? Do you disagree with it?
I fear that there is a fundamental question that needs to be answered first, and that is, should VAT apply on education?
Okay. Okay. And if let's say, for example, somebody answered possibly,
so then
are you in favour of that or not?
So then does that apply to universities, to tutors, to commercial language tuition, recognizing that in fact education is a merit good and our investment in education in the UK helps to promote the well-being, the health of our future generations and their economic impact?
There will be many who would respond to that and say, if it is a business in education, then it should be open to be taxed. So in other words, if it's not a state free at the point of delivery education institution, then it should be taxed. So that includes, you see, that's where I guess for these people who would say that, they might not include universities in that for complicated reasons. They may or they may not. They would include tuition centres in it, and they would include maybe nurseries in it, private nurseries. But I don't know whether they'd include universities in that. I don't know. But what would you say to them?
Well, let's just take a look outside the education sector. Let's look at something else which is very similar, and that is the healthcare systems. If you have a need to have an operation, you can choose for a private operation to be undertaken. You don't pay VAT on that. What's different?
Well, we're going to discuss this in plentiful detail as we go around. I'll go next to Sarah. Sarah,
I knew you'd do. I knew you'd do that.
No, I'm going in order of everyone I introduced. What is there anything you would say to what Ian said there?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I'm really clear that I think if you choose to buy an education for your child, then you are buying from a business that is providing that for you, and that business should be liable to VAT and other taxation in the same way that any other business is. So that to answer the point about healthcare, I think there's a world of difference between buying healthcare and buying an education. Healthcare is something that we hope that we're never going to need. We need more of it as we get older. But an education is something that sets up and equips people to contribute to society for the rest of their lives. And I think that makes it very much more important. And for that reason, I think if you choose to step outside of that and purchase an advantage for your child, then you are stepping into the business arena, and you should pay tax just like everybody else does. And that money should then go back to the state sector to help fund state education.
Ian, I'll give you a chance to respond to Sarah before I move forward with that. And also, I wanted to ask, before I bring Ian in, Sarah, I wanted to ask you what you thought about what Ian, because that is a point raised by many people on that side of the argument, which is around the university issue. Now, you work for a university. So
I do, yeah.
Do you believe that there should be a VAT exemption for your university?
That is a really good question. I have to be completely honest and say that I've confined my kind of background research and my opinion to state schools up to, well, basically up to 18 as it is now. And I have to say I haven't really thought about universities. So I'm afraid I'm gonna kind of sidestep that one. I'd like to think that education would be free for everyone at university, but that in terms of students paying fees. But I honestly don't know enough about how universities are funded, so I'm going to sidestep that one. I'm really sorry, but I don't have enough information to really respond to that.
We'll bring in other people obviously in a minute, but I don't either. That's why when I caveated what I said earlier on about universities, it does seem to be a bit more blurred for me on how it's funded, where it's funded from, where the fees, what those institutions are, etc., etc. However, I think it's a valid question to ask in terms of universities within that bracket. Ian, I don't know whether you want to respond to anything Sarah said.
I would. I think with respect, there is an assumption there that independent schools are businesses in some way. Many of the independent schools in the UK are in fact charities. And any surplus that is made in terms of income is obviously reinvested for the benefit of the students that come through the school. They provide a lot of employment in their local areas. They provide the financial impact in their local areas through employment, through the education system, and provide that merit good for a very long time moving forward. I think it's also important to recognise that people choosing an alternative way other than the state way is actually the natural state for education. If you go back to the Education Act, it does state that parents have the responsibility to educate their children. Many parents absolve themselves of that responsibility by sending their child to a state school. However, others choose to home educate. Others choose to send to an independent school. Others may even choose to hire in individual tutors one at a time. And everything else other than the independent school element is not chargeable for VAT.
Right, I'm going to move on to Christine now. Christine, what are your thoughts on this initial question of whether you agree or disagree with the policy? You are obviously a principal of a independent school.
Yeah, I'd like to begin by saying I don't think there's anybody here or any head teachers or any professionals that we want the best for 100% children in this country, without a doubt. And I think any measures where it would benefit the education of children, including either children in the state system, then I would fully back. But the reasons why I'm opposed to the VAT is I believe in parental choice. I believe that the parents have already paid their tax. They've already paid towards a state place. And if parents want to pay for an education for their children, that's got to be their choice and they shouldn't be taxed on it, because this is a tax on parents at the end of the day, not school. And the other thing is I really don't think it's going to raise the money that is anticipated by the government that it will, because we're already seeing an exodus of children out the system. You can see that and there's another census coming out in January as well, so we'll see it too. We're seeing a national drop-off, and I really just think that the money won't be raised, and it's still not going to be enough. Even if they were to raise that amount of money, it's still not going to be enough. So if you look at that NFER survey that came out a couple of days ago, they were suggesting that teachers would have to be paid 10% more for the next 2 years to be able to try and hit the target of recruiting teachers into the profession. And our recruitment issue at the moment in the UK is critical. And so I really just don't think it's going to raise the money. So why damage something that works, that's good? And why can't we find other ways of raising money to ensure that all children, not 93% or 7%, but 100% have the best possible education in the UK?
Why should private schools get that VAT exemption though, Christine? Why should they get it?
But this isn't... I know what you're saying, but this is actually the tax.
It's not what I'm saying. It's just what people are saying. It's questions there.
It is a tax on parents buying education, which is their choice, and education should not be taxed. Fundamentally, I think it's ethically and morally wrong. But
could that there will be people out there who will say, well, a lot of these schools now. I understand what Ian said earlier about the way that some of these schools are registered as charities or as other entities, okay? But you can also have a charity that's also registered as a limited company. You can be both. Also, I guess what some out there would say is that the idea that they don't make money, well, it depends, because they make money that is then potentially spent as an expense. So, for example, if salaries are very high, or if the people at the top end take a huge salary out of that, then that is, they would see that as an expense within that charity framework, right? Like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's not a one size fits all. So if you take, for example, LVS Ascot, we're owned by the Licensed Trade Charity. And so every year we give in excess of £2 million to those who are distressed in the trade. Now, during COVID, when those pubs and restaurants were shut, our charitable giving went through the roof. So we are a true charity. So you can see it's not a one size fits all. We are a true charity.
We've had a comment. Mrs. B says, my SEND child is in a small independent school. By sending her there, she's providing relief to the state sector. As Christine says, I've already paid tax on the earnings I pay her fees with. John Davidson says, how about the schools pay corporation tax on their profits if they are deemed to be businesses? We've also got Helen Barnett. Universities are funded by parents or the state, so paid for. They pay for what university they want, including ones with a name to help on their CV. I don't know if that's always the case, but interesting comment. Agree with Ian, Mrs. B. Small independent schools, not for profit, doing a lot of good in the community, and their staff and pupils are being put most at risk by the policy. I'm going to now bring in Katrina.
Hello.
Now, Katrina, I'm going to ask you sort of, because you mentioned earlier about your personal experience. So tell us about that, and then bring in obviously your point of view as well.
Okay. Well, I got 2 points of view. Like I was a teacher for 21 years in school. I still consider myself a teacher by trade. I go and visit a lot of schools, and I work with a lot of different kinds of entities of schools, anything from AP to large private schools. I send my daughter to private school. I chose to do that for pastoral care reasons. She needed to be in a smaller environment. She doesn't have any additional needs, but it is a school that's fully inclusive. It's not one that has an entry exam or anything like that. And it's a very multicultural, inner city, fully inclusive school, because that was the right kind of school for her. Now, I am fortunate insofar as she's my only child, so I only have one set of fees to pay, but I run an education business. So it's really interesting that people are talking about tutoring and things like that, because part of what I do is tutoring. For example, I also run a tuition business for 5 years previously to this. I offer education services. I'm VAT registered. And honestly, I know there's going to be a bit of slippage where some of the children are going to have to leave or will leave for some time. So there is going to be some fall away, but I don't think it's going to, when I became VAT registered with my business, I didn't lose a single client. I don't know, anecdotally, I don't know anybody. This is in our city, there's very few private schools. So I know quite a few people who send their children to the same school as me. Anecdotally, I don't know anyone who's leaving the school that we go to. And the school have thought of, creative ways of doing things like bursaries and scholarships, etc., for children who may be financially in difficulty. They've also decided to pass on some other kind of discounts to certain members of the school, etc. So I can't see that. It's in the long run, I think that this is probably going to be the best thing to do in order to raise some money for the state school system. I get to see the compare and contrast, because I may very well be in a private school that is a private, for example, special school one day, and then in a state school and then in a city the next. So I literally get to see that comparison. And I take your point that it might not raise all the money, Christine, but we've got to do something. And I wouldn't consider myself to be especially wealthy, right? I probably earn about the same as an average Senko. My husband's an LSA, right? We've made our decisions. We only have one child, okay? But ultimately, we knew for about a year that this was going to happen. Like, it was likely that Labour were going to win. We knew there was going to be a 20% income at this time, so we've had time to plan for it financially. And honestly, I think it's the best thing that we can do, because the money has to come from somewhere. And honestly, I think paying your taxes is one of the most patriotic things you can do. So I actually do think that probably on balance, most people who send their children to private school do have the broadest shoulders, and therefore should be the ones who are paying the most tax. I also think, universities aren't entirely exempt, by the way. Private universities do have to pay some, and also some charities are also VAT registered. I know a little bit about VAT because I'm a businesswoman who pays VAT. So it's not entirely true to say that charities are completely exempt, because not all of them are. They can get some exemptions, but it's a bit more complicated than that. So I honestly think that on balance, it probably is the best way to raise some money. And we got to do something about state schools, because they're in a hell of a state, the worst I have seen in over 20 years.
Christine, I want to give you a chance to maybe respond on those points.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. We need more money in education generally. It's just got to be done in a better way, because I just still don't agree with parents being taxed on tax-paid money for education that should be free. And I'm sure there's other ways of doing it. So if we're going to call private education a luxury, what other taxes are there on luxury goods? So if you went to, and I'm not a VAT specialist, but you buy a luxury car or a watch or a holiday, are there other sectors? Are there other things that the money could be raised on by raising the taxes generally? Again, I'm not a VAT specialist. Why hit a population of parents with an extra tax? Labour said they weren't going to increase taxes. okay, this is not an increase, this is just a new one. I would be pretty annoyed if I'm a parent of an independent school child right here, right now. I'm quite glad mine have left school now and I don't have that burden, because I know there's a lot of upset people out there who are losing sleep and children who won't be returning to their private school in January.
But Katrina, you've said your child is in one. So I mean, how do you personally feel about the rise? Are you saying because you've prepared for it, you're okay with it, or are you saying
I'm fully 100% prepared for it? I mean, look, right, like I said, I'm not a wealthy woman, right? I'm probably paid similarly to what you are, right? Which is kind of like, you know, and my husband's an LSA, right? We're not wealthy people. We happen to be, in comparison to people in the United Kingdom, probably doing pretty much okay, right? But we have, you know, people who, the vast majority of people who send their children to private schools are not hugely wealthy, but we are capable of financial planning. I knew the Labour government were going to come in. I see what goes on in state schools. The money has to come from somewhere. And as I run an education business, I can't understand why I pay VAT. Well, I pass VAT on to my customers. And nurseries do, for example, and private universities do, and tuition centres, which I also ran previously, do, and private schools don't. And some of them are run as charities, so they could then they can apply for the exemptions that apply to charities, which are kind of quite specific. You know, I mean, the charitable part of your trust, for example, they can apply for some relief in certain areas, but the business part of things is going to be VAT-able. And, you know, like, I'm not an expert, but I do know a little bit about it, you know, from an education point of view. And I just think the money's got to come from somewhere. So I'm absolutely 100% behind it.
Sarah or Ian? I don't know whether. Go on, Sarah. You go
first. So I've got a few things to say here. First of all, there's a few things, comments about taxation, about, you know, why does it have to be schools, and why can't it be the gambling industry? And I get all of that, right? I understand that. There's plenty of ways to raise taxation, but all we can focus on in this discussion is VAT on school fees, right? And I'm also hearing what Christine said about her school, which sounds absolutely lovely, a genuine charitable school, and I have reasons to support those. That sounds, you know, to me it just sounds wonderful, and really what the whole point of a charitable status for education was set up for. But the bigger picture is that as long as schools, well, we've now got to the point where schools have to pay VAT on fees, and I think that's perfectly fine and reasonable, and as it should be. I'd actually like to see schools, a considerable number of schools, lose their charitable status as well, because I think that as long as the taxpayer continues to fund a layer of education, then what we have is a stratified society where we have a group of people who have been bought privilege and advantage over other people, and that seems to me fundamentally unfair. And this is where I come from. It's the unfairness of it, and I do think that everybody should have the same opportunities. People should be treated the same, should go through the same system. I also, I'm going to hear loads of people go, yeah, but state schools are rubbish and they're not very good, and I had to move my child out of a state school because they were being bullied. And I have two friends who had to do that, and it's tragic. And I think that's terrible. If you have to move a child from state school to private because your child is being bullied, and the state school either doesn't acknowledges it or simply refuses to do anything about it, that's a terrible tragedy, and that's something that should be addressed. But I do think that the state system needs an awful lot more money. It needs more teachers. It needs more. School buildings are crumbling around us. There's an awful lot more money needed. The only way that that's going to happen is through taxation. And I think VAT on school fees is the first step. I think it should go further for larger moral reasons. And I hear all the arguments from the other side, but I think at some point you have to take a stand and say, this is what I believe for these reasons. There will always be arguments against it. That's why we've got schools with charitable status. That's why we're in the situation we're in. But I think it needs to change, and this is the first step on that journey.
Ian.
Yeah, well, I'd like to start just by reminding people that it's not schools that are paying the VAT on fees. This is a VAT on parents.
Yep, sorry, parents, my mistake.
The parents have generated their income and paid their income tax, which has funded a state sector place. That state sector place they have chosen not to take up. They've then chosen to give some of their income to an independent school to educate their child, which is their right under the Education Act to choose an appropriate education for their child. They're then being asked to provide a further tax for a system that they are not taking advantage of, that they are not, they're not involved in. How can that be fair? That's an open question that I'll leave.
You're talking about me being taxed, Ian. So
Well,
it's not me who's going to be taxed, and I'm in favour of it. So, I mean, okay, right. So if you liken it to anything else, it is a luxury that you're getting, right? Sarah's completely right, right? My child is getting a luxury education where she's got only 15 children in her class, right? My reasons are because actually she was bullied in the state sector. So that is really the reason why she was doing that, right? And I don't think any less of any of the state schools that are around me. It wasn't right for my child. I'm in the fortunate position to be able to pay for her to go there. And I know it's a luxury. I've made that choice. I pay my income tax. All of the stuff you're saying, Ian, that applies to me. Yes, absolutely. 100% completely agree with you, right? But the thing is, right, if I decide to buy organic foods, right, then I'm going to pay more for it because I chose the luxury item. Right. If I go on a holiday, I can stay at a Premier Inn or I can go and stay at the Hilton. Right. I pay more for it because it's a luxury. So it makes perfect sense that I would have to pay more tax on something that it is a luxury. It is an incredible privilege. You've only got to look at the statistics of children who get into universities, children who get the best apprenticeships, children who get the best jobs. They all go to private schools. Most of the cabinet in the previous government was all privately educated. It's a massive privilege, and it's definitely a luxury. Okay. And yes, I did pay twice for it, but I'm completely my eyes are open to all of that. But also, I run a business. It's an education business. I have to pass VAT on to my customers. Why is it different? I don't understand. And thirdly, okay, going back to the charity status one as well, right? Charities can apply for certain exemptions. So if your school is a charity, you can apply for certain exemptions. I don't know the details of that. I'm not an accountant, but it's not like, it's not like the charity status is going to have to suddenly be removed as a result of this. Not the charity work that you do, and you obviously do some really amazing things, is going to have to be removed because of all of this. It's about getting the right advice from the right people. And, yeah, I'm going to be taxed twice, Ian. Absolutely, I am, but I'm still in favour of it.
So when we see that somewhere between 10 to 15% of children leaving the independent sector is all that it would take to make this a net zero policy with no gain to the state sector at all, how is that going to work? How is that going to generate the additional 6,500 teachers that are supposedly going into the state sector, which is only, 0.3 of a teacher per school?
I mean, look, okay, my evidence is anecdotal, but I don't see that it's 15 to 20% of people who are leaving. I mean, do you have that evidence from your school? Or, I mean, I don't want you to give away anything that's sort of GDPR, etc. But I mean, do you have evidence that it's going to be 15 to 20% of children who leave the private sector?
I've got the evidence from the Adam Smith Institute that it will only take between 10 and 15% of students leaving the independent sector to make this a net zero policy.
But are they doing that though?
Just to come in, I mean, Bridget Phillipson has said very clearly that she doesn't believe that there will be that sort of exodus.
I don't.
There is commentary out there that suggests it could be more like 5%.
Yeah,
that end up leaving.
There is also, Tom, newspaper reports and reports from local governments where in Surrey, for example, there are no places for any children leaving in year 9 and above. in the state sector, and they're having to bus students over 30 odd miles to get them into a state school.
Having said that, though, Surrey has got an awful lot of private schools, though, hasn't it? I mean, like, it's a really, like, you know, that and Oxfordshire is probably the two with the highest number of private schools. So maybe that's just disproportionate because of the area. Like, I mean, you know, where I live, I'm in Cardiff. We've only got 4 private schools in the entire city, and there's 400,000 people. So it's going to be places and places. There's always going to be a shakeout when there's a new policy with these sorts of things. But like, look, if you look at any other business, right? If your mechanic suddenly said, oh, I've got to charge you VAT on this, or your hairdresser said, I've got to charge you VAT on this, right? You get some time to think about it, and you get to make an informed decision about whether you continue to go there. Like my dog groomer did it recently, okay? And you know what? They didn't lose a single customer. Right, I had to put VAT on my charge a year ago, right, and I didn't lose a single customer. Right, anecdotally, I don't know of anybody, and of the private schools that I work with, they are talking around about that kind of like 5% that is kind of being bandied about. I don't have the figures. We won't have the figures probably for several months. But I honestly can't see it being 10 to 20%.
Christine, somebody, again, you might not be able to answer this, but Rachel has asked, well, she's asked Ian, but you're the principal, so we'll ask you. She has asked what percent do you think are going to leave your school? If you can't answer that, that's absolutely fine.
It is early days, but I think what we're seeing across the country, probably in September 24, which has just gone, about 5 to 8% of children just didn't arrive. So the offers might have gone out there, but over the summer, obviously people got a bit jittery and didn't arrive. Then we're going to see a further drop off in January. And then we're going to see that the real impact will be September 2025. And I think that's when we could see 10 to 15%. I've just got a couple of other points on that. Is if we're talking about fairness, let's say about these children that do leave our schools, in the independent sector, there's going to be, it will create more social divide. Because parents can afford, and I've looked at some of the chat here, and some of the parents, teachers here are saying they can afford to move into rich areas where, if you look at the top 10 state schools in the country, take out faith schools and grammar schools, the average house prices in those areas are £650,000 to £1 million. And I know a very good state school in Ascot where I'd say the average house is £2 to £3 million. You're going to have more children you might get more children being tutored for the grammar schools. You're going to push out more disadvantaged children. You know, there's going to be a hit on possibly on a pay bill coming up for academies. Again, it's going to really exacerbate the recruitment issues, and Latin's just been taken away in the state schools as well. So we've got a lot of children who are going to be disadvantaged by this. And I've got a question for Katrina. Being a neurodiversity specialist, okay, bearing in mind it's going to be some of these smaller SEN schools that are going to really suffer from this. And I know in my school, out of 800 children, a quarter of those have special educational needs, but they don't meet the threshold for an EHCP. So my parents, they not only pay the fees, they pay SEN support on top of that as well. And a lot of these children will be the ones that are going to be forced to leave their school. And I do know there's people watching on here tonight who are in that position. How does that make you feel as a neurodiversity specialist?
I love this. This is a brilliant question. Thank you. I'm also neurodivergent myself. Right. My daughter's school, like I said, is a fully inclusive school. Right. So they have a large cohort of autistic children and other neurodivergent children. So yeah, I know exactly the kind of children that you're talking about. And also previously, my last kind of like in-school teaching gig was at a school that was specifically, well, generally speaking, for children who were, you could describe loosely as anxious non-attenders, a huge number of which were exactly the kind of children that you describe. Okay. So I know exactly what you're talking about. There will be other funding that is available. I mean, there are a large number of children who are at private schools who are on EHCP or an IDP, as far as you know, because that's what we call them in Wales. That's that's kind of similar thing that we have in Wales. So there will be that. There will be families who have a whip round and Auntie Flo plays for it. There will be. The thing is, right, you can't know about somebody's individual circumstances unless you tell them. So we are talking in very general, broad, sweeping terms here. I don't think that those children are going to be the ones who are affected the most from this, because the vast majority of them do have access to additional funding, which is available. There's lots. I know that there's lots. There's lots of scholarships and bursaries and things. Well, there are in Wales. Okay, I'm just talking about from people that I know. Okay, I can't see it as I really just can't see it as being the landslide of difficulty that everybody sees it as being. I really don't. I think what is more likely to happen is that there will be more private schools who apply for EHCPs and IDPs. But there are lots of children already in private schools who have IDPs and EHCPs. And in certain counties, for certain, I mean, actually just thinking about it back to when I worked in Gloucestershire, there are other pieces of funding that are available as well. There's also flexi schooling, which brings in a whole other thing that people can do too. So I just like, I have other thoughts as well, but I don't want to give away any sort of like private information here. But I mean, both as a neurodivergent person and as a neurodiversity specialist, I can't see that it's going to be the landslide of disappointment that everyone thinks it's going to be.
I think I've got a lot of children in my school who possibly are on the spectrum there as well, who are going to be extremely anxious about leaving a school where they're comfortable and we're meeting their needs.
Are they leaving?
Yeah, some of them are leaving. And for me, it's tragic. One child lost because of this is tragic.
Christine, one person's asked, I think it was Rachel again, I can't remember. Someone said, but what's your average loss rate per year, like pre this change? You mentioned 5 to 8%. So what's the average before that?
No, so our numbers were pretty stable up until then. We just, as soon as the general election happened in July, that's when we saw that sort of, I wouldn't say it's falling off a cliff, because I think because it's been brought in mid-year, a lot of parents will see this year out because they just don't want to leave mid-year, even though we are seeing, some go. The big drop-off will be in September 2025.
I think it's also important to note that there are children who are in years 10, 11, 12 and 13 who their parents will be completely and utterly reluctant to move them, despite the fact that they possibly can't afford to keep them in their schools, because they don't want to move them during the exam years. They've got no idea what school they're going to end up in. There's no consistency of the choice of options and the specification for exam boards. So how can you move them? That is so dangerous to that child.
I've got a question for everybody, okay, based on this, because this is a really interesting bit, which is the SEND sort of part of this. Is there will be SEND students in state schools now who would love to be in a private school, right? And there will be thousands of them who would love it. There is a very small subset of those students who can currently access those class sizes and resources, and that's the key part that's I guess maybe attractive to them, because they're out of that environment where there might be, as Katrina said with her child, there might be more chance of bullying or whatever, right? So I guess this is a question for everyone. Should every child then have access to that? Every SEND child have access to that? How can we, are we saying, and I'll ask Ian, because I think Christine's had to go, but Ian, should every child then have access to that? And therefore that would surely be impossible, because that would have to then be state funded to give them, that would involve changing the whole landscape of state education.
There is nothing more true than the comment that every child matters. And it doesn't matter what the needs of that child are. If the parent chooses for the state education system to provide for that child, you would expect the state education system to be able to meet the needs of that child. However, there are local authorities around the UK. I've taught in Wales, as you know, so I know that there are specialist independent schools where local authorities who recognise that there is not the state school provision available they pay for those children to have access to the independent school so that that child's needs are met.
Okay, I mean, I don't know whether anybody else wants to come in on that. Sarah, you haven't spoken for a while.
Yeah, so I mean, Ian's absolutely right. Every child does matter, and every child needs to have the opportunity to do their very best in a secure, calm, and inclusive environment. And I'm talking about their very best. I'm not talking about, you know, getting top grades, getting you know, getting your grade 8, getting your top flight A levels. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about every individual being able to do their best within that individual's capabilities. What I see is that the split between the state and private school is leading to a 2-tier society where we have people in positions of power and authority purely because of the university they managed to get to, because of the private school that helped to send them there, that then appoint people like themselves, and the whole system has become rotten. And I want that to change. And one of the ways I see that changing is by challenging the independent education sector. And I think the first, like I said, in an ideal world, I would like charitable status removed from most schools. There's a long history of the Anglican Church and the Tory party making sure that I think it was initially 9 universities, and it's now expanded to quite a few thousand schools. They fought really hard for charitable status to remain with those institutions because that's where they were sending their sons. And historically, they've worked really hard to keep that. And so we are now in a situation where we have, as I said, this divided society. And I would like that to be dismantled. And I see education, where children are educated, as the first step in that process. I want really good state schools. I want state schools with smaller class sizes. I want state schools that are run like, for example, like Michaela School. I know that's a bit of a controversial choice, and Catherine Burblesing is by no means my favourite person, but I'd love to work in her school because it's calm, it's managed, all the students do really well, she got really good results. I would like to see more state schools, all state schools, primary, secondary, operate on that basis and be the best that they can be. And I realise that this is a utopia that is never going to happen, but we have to have something to aim for. And the first thing that needs to happen is that the state sector needs funding. It desperately needs more money. And the only way that's going to come is from taxation. And I think if you I realise that there's a kind of middle strata of parents like Katrina who are by no means wealthy, but are making the sacrifice for their children. I don't want them to do that. I want them to know that there's a state school on their doorstep that they're happy to send their child to. That's what I want. And if the really rich choose to send their children to private school, well, they should pay through the nose for it, and they shouldn't get any help from the taxpayer if that's what they choose to do. But I want the best for the state, and that's what I'm arguing for. Sarah, I'm arguing for a better state.
I will ask you the question, because what you use the word utopia there, because what you're describing there, where you have a free market, you will always have choice.
Yes.
You'll always have choice.
Yes.
So what you're describing is many would describe, not me, many out there would say that is just a utopia version of a free market society.
I wouldn't argue with them. I wouldn't argue with them, but we have to start somewhere. We have to start with that aim, with that vision, even if it never completely gets there. I mean, you know, somebody said in the comments earlier on that what I was advocating was communism, and I'm really not. I'm really not.
That.
You know,
Sarah, I didn't put that on screen. I nearly put it on screen, and I didn't put it on screen. Yeah. But thank you for highlighting it, because it is
I'm really not. I am left wing. I'm completely.
Are you? I didn't pick that up.
But I'm not in favour of communism, but I am in favour of a country where we start to dismantle this hopeless class system that we have. You know, the really good example, I looked it up earlier on, when this came out in the COVID inquiry, Lee, can't remember his second name, who said he said to the panel, we need to have free school meals for primary school children. And everybody else on the panel, he asked them, who's ever had free school meals? Nobody had. That entire panel consisted of people who had no understanding of what it's like to be to come from a family where money is so tight that free school meals are absolutely essential. And this is what happens when you have this very divided society. You end up with a load of people at the top who really don't have any clear understanding of what it's like for the people at the bottom. And I want to start to challenge that. And I think that on school fees is a good place to start. I'd like to see it go further. I appreciate that my views are a bit extreme, and there's going to be loads of comments. I can see them cropping up. My ideology.
I wouldn't necessarily label your views extreme in the sense. I'm sure there are a lot of people who hold those views. Whether they're extreme or not is not really for me or for Teachers Talk Radio to say. But there will be many out there who hold those views, right? What I'm going to do now, because I know Ian wants to come in. He's had his hand up for about 5 minutes. So I'm going to bring Ian in next, and maybe Christine, and then Katrina, right, on what you've said, Sarah. Before we do that, I just want to give a big shout out to John Catt, who are our partners on the show this evening. If you're enjoying the show, by the way, we've had 1,000 live viewers so far. So if you're watching this live, and we've had loads and loads of comments, I haven't had a chance to read out all the comments, right? I will come back to all the comments. Obviously, Sarah's just read a really important one about her being a communist. But all the other ones, we will come back to them as soon as we can. But there's been loads. So thank you for interacting. Keep sending in the comments. We'll and obviously like and subscribe as well if you're watching on YouTube, please. And thank you, John Catt, for supporting the show, because they support this and every conversation we have on TTR. So Ian, you had your hand up for it. I'll let you come in first on what Sarah was saying.
Thank you, Tom. I actually had my hand up because I am one of those children who was educated through the state system. And yes, for a period, I was eligible for free school meals. I am proud of the fact that I've got to where I am through the education that I've received. And it is as a direct result of teachers that inspired and enthused me and gave me the opportunities to thrive. And that's what parents want. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the state sector, whether it's in the independent sector, whether it's through homeschooling, whether it's flexi schooling. Every parent wants the best for their child, but they believe that they can go about it in different ways. Some incredibly rich people will send their children to the state sector because they'd rather spend their money in other ways. They're not being taxed in this. How is that fair? Similarly, there are people who are scrimping and saving to get their children into an independent school because they believe it will be the best for their child, and they will not be able to afford the increase that is being applied to their fees because of the imposition of a brand new tax on VAT. This potentially will result in some independent schools closing. Some people may in fact find that whilst they wanted to send their child to an independent school, they can no longer do so because it is closed. It is a risk that this will actually exacerbate the class divide. This will actually make independent schools more elitist and not give you that social equality that you're searching for. That's my opinion.
Ian, a few questions. One would be, and I'll read out the comments in a minute as well, just to add, but a few questions that came to me while you were talking was around the 1.7 billion that they are saying that will bring in. Now, obviously, you've raised relevant points about that may range from up to 1.7 billion, let's say. Let's even cut that out. Let's say a billion, right? Whatever you want, right? Labour have said that entire amount of money goes straight into state schools. Now, of course, people will scoff. There will be other people out there who will scoff at that and say that's a drop in the ocean, etc. But it's still a sizable amount of money. £1 billion, okay, would go into 1.7 billion if it goes to what they're saying would go into this directly into the state sector. Now, where do you think then, if they're not going to get What would you like to happen then to create that 1.7 billion that they want? Because that's a substantial amount of money. So just give me some ideas of where you would like to see that money come from. If it's
So
not
we've
there.
talked a lot this evening and tried to make comparisons about things that are outside of the education sector. We've discussed things from cars to watches and so forth. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that we should impose VAT on luxury goods because you brought them from a certain shop. For example, we know that beans are VAT exempt. If I buy beans from Aldi or I buy beans from Fortnum and Mason, I'm still paying the same amount of VAT. That is 0 rated. If I buy a computer, it doesn't matter whether I buy it from Currys or whether I get it specifically made, I'm paying 20% VAT on that computer purchase. Now, with education isn't a luxury. Education is a fundamental right under the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child. We have to provide education. It's a parent's duty to do that.
Education is available free at the point of delivery. There will be those who would say education is available free at the point of delivery. So there is a specific brand of education that is luxury, but education in this country is free for 93% of the people who choose to take it up as free.
But I want 100% of the children and the parents to have a choice as to how they get their education.
But that would come back to my question earlier.
If we're looking at improving...
Sorry, go on.
If we're looking to improve the funding for the state sector, I don't think it's the private sector, I don't think it's the independent sector, parents, that should simply be paying for that. If you recall, this is providing a merit good for society. Education, just no matter where it comes from, provides a merit good for society. It benefits the children now, it benefits society and the economy in the future. So in order to pay for that, it is everyone's responsibility. And that's why up until the 31st of December 2024, everybody contributed to the state education provision fairly.
So would you then be arguing that all the students who can't access your school should be able to have the choice to access it, because that is their freedom of choice in education?
I am suggesting that every child has that opportunity to access education. Tom, if you had £1 million tomorrow, what would you spend it on? You'd probably buy some
your school, 100%.
You would probably buy some luxury. Yeah, you'd probably buy some luxury goods.
I'd get down to your school, Ian. I'd get.
No, but you can get yourself a car a lot cheaper. You can provide education in lots of different ways, and you're penalising someone who is, in some cases, making sacrifices to be able to send their child because their child has been bullied or has special educational needs, or they simply want to put their children in a school that they will believe their child will thrive. So really, it should be down to income tax and globally paid taxes throughout the UK to be able to provide the minimum state level that we expect for our children.
Katrina, I'll bring you in.
Thanks. I just want to reply to one person who asked how many of my clients are VAT registered, and it says 100% of parents are not VAT registered. A lot of my clients are not VAT registered, just to clear that up. And a lot of my clients are parents as well. Sometimes they pay me directly to work with their child. So just to clear that up. Also, I got described as nasty and reckless as well. So I'm not a communist though. So. High five.
That's clearly the worst thing, being a communist.
Christine, do you want to come in on anything that Ian said?
Yeah, I mean, you've nailed it there, Ian. You know, it's I'm a state school girl myself as well. In fact,
yeah, me too.
In front of 1,000 people, but I was expelled at 14, and I went to another one, and the rest is history. And it was brilliant. But, you know, one thing we're getting around here, it's going to take more than 1.7 or 1.8, even if it was raised, to improve the system. Now, we've already
I don't think anyone would deny that. But
so why is the focus on private schools and the VAT issue when how much do we actually need and where does it need to be spent and how? Because you can throw all the money you like into a boat that's got a hole in the bottom, and it's just going to come straight out and not achieve anything. Now, as you say, Catherine Birbalsingh, and I am a fan of her, Okay, there are some good examples of what we can do in this country, and I'm sure if we all pull together, it would be about 100% of children, because even 7% is 600,000 children in this country right now whose parents and them are not looking forward to this next academic year. And we should, as a country and a nation, be ashamed of ourselves.
For what? Sorry, I missed that last.
Christine?
We should be ashamed of ourselves that we are going to tax education when it's not done anywhere else in the world. And the only place in Greece where it was a disaster. And in some countries, the state actually subsidizes some of the teachers' salaries in private schools because it's taken the burden off the state. Now, we are in this position, having this conversation and discussion tonight about children's lives.
Yeah.
Taxing education is wrong.
Okay, so you say do you believe that no education services at all should be taxed?
I think when it comes to children, the education should be provided. It should be provided free. But if you, as a parent, and you have a right to choose education and you want to pay VAT, that's great. But I do not agree on putting VAT or any taxes on children's education. These children are the future of our country. And while we're all arguing about it, we're failing a lot of them. Okay, and I think, we need to do something about it. And it's about time we all pulled together and actually agreed on a path for 100% of children, not 93, not 7%. Bridget Phillipson and the Children's Commissioner are there to support 100% of the children in the UK.
Oh, no, I totally agree with you there. I absolutely 100% agree with you. There's a lot of things that we need to do that are better, that the whole system needs to be changed, particularly when it comes to sending neurodivergent pupils. Absolutely. But, the money's got to come from somewhere, and it's either we borrow it or we tax it. And I know people keep saying about income tax, etc., and saying that that's a fair tax. It demonstratively isn't. Obviously, the most fairest thing to do is to tax wealth. And this is the start.
But you're not necessarily taxing wealth where some parents can't afford to add this VAT on.
Okay, but the wealthiest people can, and the vast majority of people who send their children to private schools are able to afford to do so, because that's why they've chosen to send their children to private schools.
But there are also incredibly wealthy people who choose to send their children to state schools,
well,
and you're
exactly.
not taxing them.
It's swings and roundabouts then, isn't it, really? Ultimately, if you look at the entire population, then you can argue that on both ways. We've had this discussion, for the last hour, basically, and we're going back in the same kind of circles.
Yeah, we are kind of going round and round here. I mean,
all parents make sacrifices. All parents make sacrifices. Yeah. I am a parent who is choosing to send my child to private school, right? I get the sacrifices of it. I've got a whole journey behind me of 14 years, right, of doing this. Yeah, I've made my decision, right? But ultimately, because I have this point of view of you are all in one place all of the time. I go to lots and lots of different places and I see it all, right? And begrudgingly, Phil, I do have a clue because I've been to 20 schools in the last month. Thank you very much, Phil. So I actually do have a clue.
Phil says Katrina has no clue. James says Ian and Christina are 100% spot on. I feel like this is like one of those old school popularity contests. I love it.
I just want to respond to Sarah, who said quite rightly, she didn't call me a communist. She said that what I was proposing was communism. So you're right, Sarah, and I do apologise, although that's fine. But I would still argue that what I am proposing is not communism. What I want.
Actually, let's widen this out. Is what both of you are proposing communism, both Ian and Sarah? Because Ian's saying that every student should be able to have access to a school like Ian's. That is elite, that might have a swimming pool or a rowing center or a specialist sort of AI center or something attached to it. So every is that also communist as well? Do you know? I'm literally just asking that question. I don't know the answer.
As I understood communism, it's where under a communist.
I'm a history teacher. I know what it is. I was just putting that out there.
There'd be no private, no grammar. Everything would be state run, hang on, I'm never sure about the difference between communism and socialism, but you wouldn't have private school. There would be no question of buying anything different to anybody else.
You couldn't
Although
buy private schools in a communist regime. You could potentially in a socialist regime. That's right. As an also history graduate, yes.
Thank you very much. So I am not ever suggesting that I want private schools to fund the state sector. That's really not what it's about at all. I'm not talking about not arguing for taking money from and giving it to. What I'm saying is that actually the choice, perhaps I'm saying that the choice, that some of the choices, if they are going to exist, the people that choose to make them should pay the full cost, so that there is no burden on the state, and so that the state can then choose to spend money on state schools and make our state schools the very best. Is it one of the Northern European countries? I can never remember whether it's Norway, Sweden, Denmark. I think it's Norway. They don't have any private schools. It's an anathema. They simply don't exist. Everything is state. And they have a really good education system. They also have a very much higher taxation rate. So people in Norway pay an awful lot more tax than we do, but they get an awful lot more back for it. So
Sarah,
pause
a second. Christine, do you want to come in on that, on the Norway point?
It wasn't so much on the Norway point, but you said with private schools, and we shouldn't be a burden on the state. You just said that. Why are private schools a burden on the state?
Well, because for charitable schools they don't pay tax on so many things that they should do. That I think they should do.
But that's not a burden on the state. We're not taking anything from the treasury, from the government.
It is, because you're getting something for less than someone else would pay for it. So that when I'm talking, that's how I see the burden. The burden is that private schools with charitable status get things at much less cost than other schools do. And that's my fundamental problem.
Sarah, I don't think they do. And in fact, we're alleviating the burden on the state because the parents aren't taking up the state places.
No, that's
£6,000-7,000 a year. Schools, we don't have any benefit. We pay for ourselves, and we've never been taxed on parents have never been taxed on education.
Schools have charitable status. That means that they don't pay tax on an awful lot of things that they use. And that's my fundamental problem, is that the charitable status affords them advantages that other schools don't have. Now, I'm not saying that all schools should not have charitable status. I think there's quite a difference between some schools that have charitable status where every single penny is spent on the education of the child and no money is made or goes anywhere else. And there are other places where that is not the case. I'm also very mindful that with academies, and somebody mentioned in the comments about academy schools, the amount, for example, that their CEOs are paid and the profit that some of those those academies, large academies, make, right? And I have a problem with that too. I'm definitely not a fan of that system either. But all of those little things are a bit kind of whataboutery for me, because for me, the fundamental principle is that we need to make our state schools much, much better. We need to make our state schools have the same qualities that attract people that pay to put their children into private school. And that's what I want. And that has to be paid for, and that money has to come from somewhere. And that on school fees is a good start on that.
We all agree that we need more money in the state system, but why break something that's not broken? Why decimate a sector and 600,000 children in that sector? Why put them at a disadvantage for money that's not going to be raised when there's going to be better alternatives to raising money to support our state sector?
Right. So here I've got to say here it does get a bit nuanced for me, because I can see that there are some schools, charitable schools, particularly in the primary sector, that have clear benefits for some children, right? But nothing that can't be replicated in the state sector. That's my argument. You know, small class sizes, all the compassion, all the things that and the you know, the quality of tuition, all of the things that people pay for when they pay for their child to go into a private school should be as good in the state sector, so that actually really there isn't much choice. You go, where's the best school? It's the state school that's in my local area. That's where my child is going to go. That's what I would like to see.
The question was
Hold on,
predominantly
Ian first, then Katrina, then Christine. Back to Christine.
The question was predominantly on VAT on private schools. So actually, I won't go into the intricacies of charity law and so on in this forum. It's not appropriate to do so. Is VAT the right thing to do? No. If we get a highly optimistic scenario of 5% of independent school children leaving the sector, then it's suggested there'll be an economic impact of positive £1 billion. If 10 to 15% leave the sector, then there will be no revenue gained. If more than 15% leave, then it will be a net detriment to the state. And if more than 25% leave, you're looking at an additional 1.5 billion a year.
Katrina.
Okay, I'm going to go in a completely different direction because I feel like we're going around in circles a little bit. And I'm sorry I keep
I did have questions. I actually had about 10 questions, but we got off.
No, John,
go on, you make your point, because I want to. We've got like 10 minutes, and I want to finish with a couple of questions. Go on.
Yeah, no, it's not you. It's the. I keep laughing at the comments because I'm getting a lot of hate here, and I think it's hilarious. And I'm sorry, everybody. I'm not saying that it's a laughing matter. Okay, right. So here's my vision, people. Right. Basically, yes, I think and I've said this quite a lot online several times. Okay, I think all schools should have class sizes of 15. Worldwide, class sizes for primary school are 22, and in secondary school are 15. Right. Ideally, all of the buildings should be rebuilt. Every teacher should not have a class size of more than 15. They should all have a member of support staff that works with them full time so they can have the proper professional relationships with each other, right? All children should have a device, whether that's a laptop or an iPad or whatever is right for them, which is set up for their own particular accessibility needs, right? So that is my dream of my education utopia and what it would be like, right? That's my little piece of communism right there, okay? At the moment, however, it's not happening, right? I've worked in private schools that were private schools for send children, okay? So I'm not talking malarkey like they're all saying in the chat, right? I literally have been there and seen that, right? And most of them were funded by IDP or, well, in those cases, statement money, or they were funded by EHCPs, or they were funded by other people who paid like private families had whip rounds, whatever. Okay. Right. So I have seen all of these things happen. Right. And I know what is possible with the money that they have at the moment. And in education, we've always made a purse out of a sow's ear, only now it's a hamster's ear. We've got even less than we had before. And something has to be done to change. Right. And unfortunately, we aren't going to be able to do this without some money. And that is one particular untapped source of money right now. And I think on balance, as somebody who runs an education business, who charges parents and people who are not VAT registered, such as charities, right? I can't see why one set of education shouldn't pay VAT and another set of education should pay VAT. It is an untapped resource which we haven't used yet. And there will have to be other ways, creative ways to find money in order to improve things in the education system. And at the moment, yeah, this £1 billion that we might be getting is an absolute drop in the ocean, but it's better than no money, right? And we've had 13 years of managed decline. So we've got to do something, right? So that is where I'm coming from. And that's my final pitch. And that's my beautiful Katrina's utopia of what education should look like. And I think actually, people, we are all on the same page here. We want a better education for the children. We want them all to have education that is as good as is in the private sector, in the state sector. And don't get me wrong, there are some amazing state schools out there. absolutely phenomenal state schools doing some amazing, brilliant work with brilliant children, fantastic teachers, etc., etc. Okay, but we've got to do something to improve things because the system is broken and it's not working. And yeah, that might be something to do with Brexit, Helen.
Christine, do you want to have a say on? I mean, I've got a few questions to finish off on that sort of go a bit off what we're talking about, but still the same topic. But anything on based on anything from the last 3 sort of rounds of chats? Because
I mean, I think the only thing is we all agree that it all needs improving. Okay. But I think we also agree it needs more than 1.7 or 1.8. And I think if you think that this policy is going to raise £1 billion a year, even if it was £1 billion, I think this is nonsense. It's not going to do it. And meanwhile, while we're going through this process, hundreds of thousands of children will suffer.
the thing is, though, right? Let me. This is one for Christine, and then for Katrina or Sarah, and maybe Ian as well. So I've listened for the hour. And by the way, Andrea put a comment in. I won't read all of it, but she said that can I? No one talks. Well, so far I've allowed every single person to absolutely have their say. So I think, and we've got a fantastic panel here, and really, I think it's an enjoyable conversation, and I think it's an important conversation that we're having. I think it's a good one, and I think it's one that actually you're not going to get on the mainstream media. You're going to. We've got expertise here. We've got people who actually work in the sector and are talking about the things that are actually happening. So, and we've got parents of people who are in the sector. So I think it's actually a very relevant conversation, and I appreciate everybody tuning in. We've had so many people tuning in, like we're nearly up to 1.5. What I'm going to say is, what I wanted to ask, and it comes back to the point I made earlier, and I'm asking to everybody, is that there are schools everywhere that everybody in the country can go to for free, right? Now, we can sort of debate the quality of different schools, but there is an opportunity for people to go and get an education for nothing, which is something that a lot of countries do not have that privilege of at all. They can't go to school at all, actually. So never mind free at point of delivery. So my question is more like, why? So we're talking about relieving the strain on the I think you said, Christine, relieving the burden on the state sector by 7% of students being in independent. My question comes back to, how do we distinguish as it stands? Because we can't talk, all these ideas of what education should look like are great from everybody, but they all rely on a lot of money, and that money has to come from somewhere. So we're talking in the current reality of what it is now and what it's going to be like next year, when the UK economy is probably not doing that well at the moment, let's be honest. So we're looking at what it is right now, and I'm saying, why can't students, why is that why can more students not go into that sector? How can we say you can be in the sector because your parents have money, but you can't be in the sector because your parents don't have money? The reality is we're always going to have independent schools, and we're always going to have state schools. So I'm sorry, Sarah, I'm going to disagree with you. It's not that I'm disagreeing with you. I think your utopia is wonderful. But in reality, we are always going to have options for people to school. And some of those options are going to cost money, and some of them are going to be free. So my question is, how do we distinguish in reality between the students who are going to be able to take that opportunity, whether that's be because their parents are going to choose to pay it or not, and those students who simply cannot take the opportunity, but they are within another environment that they don't want?
I'm not really sure I understand the question. You talking about waving a magic wand and making things, because I'm
saying it to both sides. I'm saying it to Ian and Christine on one side of it. I'm saying, are we saying that somebody who does not have the income to pay for an independent school should be able to access it? And then my next question then is, who pays for that?
Well, you can mandate that all independent schools, all independent fee-paying schools have to take on a certain percentage of of students at no cost, right? You can mandate that if that's what you want to do, but that doesn't address the problem that there isn't enough money in education. That doesn't address the fundamental problem. And most independent schools have some form of bursary. I'm sure they're going to be bending over backwards to accommodate those parents that literally cannot find that extra money to pay that VAT and are facing their children leaving. Right, I'm absolutely positive that those independent schools will be doing everything they can to try and ease the burden. But we, as Katrina said, we've had 13, 14 years of managed decline. There is nowhere to go. There is nothing that's going to get any better without any more money. And actually, I'm not even sure that it can get any worse either, because we're actually looking at children in schools that are literally falling apart around their ears. I don't know what's going to happen, that schools close because they haven't got enough teachers to teach the students. That already schools are looking at changing the hours that they educate children to try and relieve that burden of not having enough teachers or not having enough specialist teachers or too many teachers off with stress. So we're already at virtual rock bottom. The only way out of this is in the short term some money, and in the long term a proper strategy that funds state education properly. But then that's competing with the NHS, prisons, all of the other things that the state funds, and this is not going to be a quick solution at all. This is going to be years, at least 15 years, I think, to reverse the decline that we've all been in. And people can, rant in the comments about, there's going to be a mass exodus of people leaving and they're going to educate their children abroad. And that's just Daily Mail nonsense, because that's not going to happen. People aren't going to do that. They're going to be forced to deal with the situation as it is and make the best of it. And they will do what Katrina has said. They'll have whip rounds around the family. Granny, auntie, uncle will do funding to try and keep the child in that school that they're in. We'll all muddle through as best we can, but there is no short-term answer to any of this. It's very much long-term. And my utopia, what I'd like to see. We all want to see that. I have my view as to how I think that's going to be achieved. Ian clearly believes that parents have to have choices. That's fine. I can live with that. That's okay. But there are no, I don't know what question you can ask. You can say, where are we going to get more money? One person has talked about taxing gambling. Yeah, why we haven't done that, I don't know. The most pernicious, damaging thing that we have in our society right now that is literally destroying the lives of thousands of people, and I don't even think it should be legal, but as it is, tax it, right? We should do that. Someone else has mentioned about an extra 20% on the wealthiest people in the country. Well, okay, so that would raise a lot of money, but then the question is that fair? Is that part of a fair taxation system? And that's a much bigger question than can be answered here. But I really don't think there's any question that you can ask that's going to address the problem beyond short term. Let's see what money we can get. Long term, very long term, needs to be a proper strategy here to refund state education so that everybody's getting the quality of education that they deserve.
Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree with you. I just the thing is, I go to special schools as well, and they are amazing facilities. And if you had those facilities in mainstream schools, what a different place it would be. But there is so much work to be done, right? And this is a long term. This isn't going to be 1 year of VAT. This is going to be basically VAT is now on it, right? Okay, so this is going to go on for decades and decades and decades, right? So eventually money is going to be created, but this is just one particular strategy. And where else is the money supposed to come from? We've got to start trying to be a bit fairer in society. It's either that or we borrow the money, schools are in such a, in my 25 years of working in education, I have never seen it so bad, right? I've never seen it so bad. And we all agree we've got to do something. So this is a something, right? And on balance, right, having looked deep inside my own soul and talked to lots of people, and with my experience of seeing lots and lots of different schools, I think that this is a way forward.
Ian?
I take on board Katrina's right to choose the best education for her child. And that's the right that I expect all parents to have. I am worried about Katrina's assertion that there will be continued income from VAT, because as mentioned, if as little as 10% of the independent school population move out of the independent sector, then there will be actually no revenue gain, because the state will be required at £8,000 per pupil to fund places for those students in the overcrowded, underfunded, falling down schools. That terrifies me. As a parent, as an educator, that is not what I want for the children, either in my care or throughout the UK.
Christine?
I must admit, and this has been quite a debate and a half, and we have been in the houses quite a bit, but what really kind of distresses me is that anybody who can support a policy which is so ideological, it's so vindictive, it's so nasty, and it's going to impact so many children in our country right now, children in my care, and I will always put children first, and I will continue to fight this battle for all children. I want the best for all children in the UK, but I will not see children disadvantaged in one particular sector because their parents choose to buy education out of money they've earned and paid tax on. It's their right, and it's up to them what they do with it. And meanwhile, we will continue to fight. Ian and I from the same school, Ian. So come Monday morning, we'll be back on the ground floor, and we'll be ensuring that you've got happy little bunny rabbits there accessing their education.
A point to Katrina and Sarah. Tony says, asking the top 20% of families to pay £1,000 per year is a much fairer way to raise that 1.5 billion.
Well,
billion.
yes, but yeah. I don't make tax policy, Tony. But yeah, I mean, that might work. But I don't make tax policy. I'm not an accountant. Like I said, I'm a teacher by trade. I happen to run a business. It might work. That seems numerically to work, but I don't know how you would identify the top 20% of families. But yeah, tax wealth is a good idea.
Yeah, I do think I would agree with that. I think we in the taxation policy in this country could do with a bit of an overhaul. There are an awful lot of loopholes that are exploited. And there are an awful lot of very wealthy individuals that could pay an awful lot more than they do and don't, right? And although, and I guess some people say, well, yes, but they're paying to send their children to private school, and that means that their children aren't going to the state school, and that's relieving the state. So why don't these wealthy people donate directly to their local state school then? What about that? Why don't they do that? Why don't they put their hands in their pockets and give a lump of money to their local state primary or secondary school? Let's have a little bit of philanthropy, but directed towards the state sector rather than settled elsewhere. That's something that could happen as well.
I'll just refer to a few other comments because we've missed so many comments from different people. John has said, would the panel support an unwinding of the policy if in a couple of years it's shown at a net loss to the Treasury?
They'll never undo VAT, John. I mean, it's a lovely idea, but they wouldn't undo VAT on anything. Once a government raises a tax, they're not going to untax somebody. They might bring it down, so it would be 20%, it'd be 17 or something, but they're not going to get rid of it completely.
Yeah.
He's also said, oh no, this is Mark, sorry, not John. Mark says, Tom, I'm guessing that's to me. How about people who don't have the income to live near a state school and access that? I'm guessing a good state school and access that. Well, because it's addressed to me, I'll answer that. Number one, I think there's some interesting perceptions about what a good school is. you know, and a lot of parents will just look at an Ofsted report. So it depends whether you consider an Ofsted report to be valid or not, or how much weight you would put on an inspection report. There are, I would personally say, a lot of good state schools out there. I would argue that there are more good state schools than not out there. Having worked in mostly state schools in my career, so yeah, how about people who don't have the income to live near a good state school and access that? Again, you could argue, what about the people who don't have a good income to attend a private school then?
Yeah. And if all state schools were good, that would be a moot point, wouldn't it? That would be that question wouldn't even arise.
Yeah,
one thing I wanted to ask Katrina and Sarah is, what about concerns over employment for people within the independent sector? Do you have concerns about teachers and stuff who might be maybe made redundant or whatever based on this policy, or is that sort of just part of the thing that has to happen?
Look, I think it's unlikely, right? But we know there's a massive shortage of teachers. So where are they going to go? There's other jobs that they can do. Look, I mean, I don't mean to be crass or flippant about it, and I know that's the way that I come across, but you know, that's just my personality. Neurodivergent, I overshare. So there may be some redundancies. Sometimes there are redundancies in school. A school that I work with had to make 6 TAs redundant recently. That was a really sad, horrible thing to do. And I didn't wish it on anybody, having been made redundant myself in the past. However, you get a payout and there is the opportunity for you to have another job. And sometimes there's a chain of schools that you might go to a different school, or sometimes there are other local schools you can go to, or you can find a job outside education. This is a really unfortunate fact. And I feel terrible for anybody who this happens to, but we do have a massive shortage of people in education. So Phil, they probably will get another job, and there are lots of schools that need teaching assistants, support staff, and excellent teachers who've got that really, good experience from working in these really excellent schools. Phil.
Ryan says private school parents already pay towards the state sector through their taxes. We do not reclaim, nor have we wanted to, tax paid when we choose to educate our children independently.
Yeah, and lots of people without children, like me, for example, pay tax. Some of that tax goes towards funding the state education. I got no problem with that. Just because I don't use it doesn't mean I'm not prepared to pay towards it.
Okay, we've got literally 2 minutes left. Just going to see if there's any other comments that are worth reading out before we unfortunately have to say ta-ta, because it's been incredibly interesting to talk about this policy. Obviously, emotions and passions run high with it, because I think it runs into a lot of different areas in people's beliefs and values and all these other things, and politics and so on. So yeah, I think it's been a really good conversation. Do you know what I'm going to do? I've gone back through the comments. There's just too many. People can go on YouTube and read the comments and reply on YouTube if you want to reply. I just want to give everyone an opportunity to finish off with like a final thought, like it's sort of like, the sort of election debate or whatever. I want to give everybody their final sort of thought on this, their final pick on their point of view on it. So we'll go in the same order that we started in, and I'll start with Ian, who was the very first person to speak on the show. And
Thank you, Tom.
This is just for everyone joining. This is a conversation about the VAT policy, the new Labour VAT policy on independent schools.
Thanks, Tom. I go back to the very first point that I made, that education is a fundamental right and should not be taxed. VAT on private school fees is a tax on parents, which is unfair because they've already paid tax on their income and they are choosing to put their children, as is their right under both UNCRC and Education Act law, to place their children where they believe their children will thrive. Children should be at the heart of this policy, and by applying VAT, there will be significant numbers of children who will be required to move school, causing disruption to their learning, their education, and their future outcomes. That is so unfair.
I think Sarah was next.
Yeah, so I think that VAT on school fees is perfectly reasonable. I think if parents choose to send their child to a private school, they should be expected to fully fund the cost of that place. And the VAT is one step in that direction. And I think it's fair and reasonable. I would like a really good state sector so that parents don't have to make those choices. But we are where we are. We need to start somewhere, and this is a step in the right direction.
Christine.
Again, it's morally, ethically wrong to tax education. I am extremely concerned for the welfare of those children who will be displaced. And my heart goes out to the parents in independent schools now who are under so much pressure. And we're in for a really rocky ride. And I will continue to fight this all the way through. I will fight for a better education for 100% of children, but especially in our sector at the moment and what we're going through, we need to stick together and continue to fight.
And Katrina, you've got 45 seconds.
Yay. I would like to say that education is already being taxed in other sectors. And I think that this just brings about parity. I think we all agree that we want better education for all of the children in our system. And if we are to move anywhere near to there being any kind of parity of experience, which is what we're talking about for the children, then we need to think of some ways of raising the money. And this is one thing that is happening. And on balance, I do think it's one of the fairest ways to go about this. I 100% do want there to be parity of experience for all children within the education sector.
Right, that brings this conversation to a close. I want to thank everybody for listening and engaging. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for all the feedback on the show as well, all the comments saying how good it was. Really, really appreciate those comments. It's really nice to see people who've enjoyed it as much as I have. Absolutely fantastic. We've had 1,500 people tuning in across all our sort of streaming platforms, and obviously there'll be lots more watching this back. And if you want to watch it back, you can do so on YouTube, you can do so on X, you can do so on LinkedIn, you can do so anywhere. We'll also publish this as a podcast, so if you don't follow Teachers Talk Radio, get over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get the podcast from. This will be published as an audio-only podcast as well, if anybody prefers to listen to the audio. Big shout out to John Catt, who thank you, Tony, capital letters. It was a robust discussion. That's what we're all about at Teachers Talk Radio. That's exactly what we're all about. Everybody was passionate, but everyone was also polite, and everybody had their say. So that's really what it's all about. So thank you very much for tuning in. So we'll be back. I mean, we've got shows every single day, so make sure you tune into those. Give us a like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. I'll be back on Monday night actually talking about opportunities for students to study in the USA. But we've got loads of sort of shows between now and Monday that you can tune into as well. Thank you very much to all the panelists. It's been absolutely great, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. And we will be back very soon. Thank you very much, and good night.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused